I'm not making this as a drama video, but whenever I've tried to not name any names, I feel like there's something intrinsically missing in essentially what I'm trying to convey. And I see a lot of things that are really wrong in the recent takes that Seibei has been just putting out there, and I think they need to be properly addressed in some video, just so there's the counter opinion out there in a very pointed way. And again, this isn't anything against Seibei. He's a smart guy, he knows what he's talking about in the game, but I think the specific design direction he wants the game to go down is inherently flawed. And I don't think it's inherently flawed in a way that's inherently bad. I think it's a direction that old school RuneScape just doesn't really benefit from as a game, and would be better suited for a different MMO or a different single player RPG. So, the first thing I want to talk about is forestry. I know this is a really hot button issue in the HLC, and it seems like almost every skiller hates the update. Now, personally, would I recommend anyone to do forestry for woodcutting XP? No, of course not. It's not a great skilling method at all. Would I recommend that you try out forestry for some of the rewards, and then if you like it, maybe keep going? Yes, it's a decent enough minigame to just pick up some rewards from. If you're doing forestry just for the Anima Park, there's absolutely nothing wrong with the, skill expansion. The place where forestry goes wrong is because people think that it's supposed to replace woodcutting in some way or another, but the way that forestry has been designed explicitly to not replace any other relevant methods. If you want to tick manipulate woodcutting, you're going to be doing 1.5 tick in 2023. You might do 2 tick if you're low level and just want to have an easier method that gives you a decent amount of XP, but if you're a skiller, you're gonna do 1.5 ticking, and that requires using trees grown in a farming patch, and that means that forestry events will not even spawn. So, forestry does not affect scaling at the high level at all right now. Forestry Part 2 is a different story, but that hasn't come into the game yet, and maybe the bad parts won't, who knows yet. At this point we can't just say. So, on a high level, forestry doesn't affect anything. What about the low level, right? So, I feel like the assumption people are making is if you're a new player, you're gonna be cutting views for 30k XP an hour, and now that forestry comes out, you're going to do the same thing you're doing, you're gonna be cutting views, and the only thing that changes is that you're gonna get these events, and these events are gonna pump up your XP rates to 100k an hour. Now, this isn't true. Low-level players don't spend their time cutting views, at least before forestry came out. You wouldn't really see anyone populating worlds at all. If you're a low-level player and you're an Ironman, maybe you cut useful for fletching XP in specifically the woodcutting guild, but more likely you're gonna be cutting teaks, Suliaceps, blisterwoods, or redwoods. None of these have been fundamentally changed by forestry, except if you're just AFKing teaks now in Prif, you get some more XP and some more forestry events, but the method itself has not fundamentally changed at all. What has changed is now the nostalgic quote-unquote option of cutting use, which again no one did before forestry, is viable again because the XP rates among trees have basically been equalized by the forestry events. So essentially what changed isn't that use got better, it's that people started doing use again. Now again, if you don't like the forestry minigames, the events, the whatever, that's perfectly fine. I don't particularly like them either. They're pretty annoying, they're not particularly engaging, they're not really fun. That's all completely fair. But they don't need to be. They're more fun than just AFKing a U3, just without any event at all, right? And I think that's the point of comparison we should be making. Because if you're just AFKing a U3, it's absolutely miserable. You're never getting any logs, you're never getting any XP drops, you're just kind of sitting there walking away from your computer and not engaging with the game at all. The better option, of course, would be to funnel low-level players into various tick manipulation methods that are actually fun, like for example 2-tick teaks, or 1.5-tick teaks, or whatever other method that's just kinda engaging. Even Suliaceps, to me, are more fun than forestry. But again, forestry isn't something that people do because it's already there and they would have cut use anyway. It's something people do because it's a new method, right? The other opinion that forestry makes woodcutting too fast is also very unfounded, because practically speaking, the only people who it increases the XP rates for are people who would have been just hard AFK anyway. you can camp Blisterwood for 50k, or you can do Forestry for 100k. Forestry is way more engaging than Blisterwood. You might say that it's engaging in an unfun and bad way. That's fair enough. You can still just go camp your Blisterwood without Forestry. That's perfectly fine. You can AFK a teak tree, you can AFK a redwood tree. It doesn't matter. But the point of comparison again isn't between people who would have done those activities anyway, because those activities are still better for their specific use case. The comparison is between people who would not have engaged in woodcutting in any substantial way, and people who now engage with forestry instead of engaging with woodcutting, right? Nothing changes. And being able to get 100k XP per hour, again, doesn't really change anything, because they have to actually play the game more, like, than they otherwise would have. Now, you might say that, hey, we shouldn't make it easier to just max your account. I vehemently disagree with this. I'm maxed, it wasn't an achievement, I didn't accomplish anything, I just played the game for a long time and did relatively efficient methods. If I hadn't done relatively efficient methods, the only accomplishment that maxing would have entailed is not quitting the game for 5 years, and I don't think that's a particularly valuable accomplishment to preserve. If the only barrier between a player and maxing as is essentially how long can you go without quitting the game, we shouldn't be encouraging that as being a sustainable gameplay loop, because it obviously isn't. If that's even a consideration involved, you should first of all not max. I think people should really stop trying to go for max when they don't like skilling, but given that that's the state of the community and that's what people are gonna do, we should stop encouraging people to hate the game for years and go like, yeah, congratulations, you didn't quit, right? That's not a good mindset. So, with that being said, what methods is Forestry comparable to? Now, the obvious comparisons are Guardians of the Rift, Temperos, Giant's Foundry, and so on and so on. These are all updates that the HLC doesn't particularly like, except for Iron Skillers and Guardians of the Rift, in which the opinions are still pretty divided. But what I would say is a better comparison for Forestry is something like Adamant Plate Bodies. It takes significantly more effort than making cannonballs, it gives you significantly more XP. It takes way less effort than running Blast Furnace, but it still gives you a pretty decently comparable amount of XP, right? And I think that's the type of method that Forestry is. It's something that's in between the super AFK low intensity methods, and it's pretty close to like half of the efficient rate for something that's entirely basically brain dead. And if your response to that is like, hey, maybe we should nerf AD Plate Bodies, they shouldn't give you profit, they shouldn't be like 300k XP an hour if the smithing outfit or something like that, or whatever. If that's your opinion, I completely respect you if you think the method like Adamant Plate Bodies need to be nerfed. However, if you don't think methods like those should be nerfed if they're old, why do you think that new methods that fill a similar niche should be nerfed? And obviously, the answer is because it would change the game too much. But again, you're not the type of player who they're changing the game for. They're changing the game for a player who doesn't even like the things that you're doing in the game. So, why work yourself up over it? Now, the other thing that I want to talk about is the Fang being a chargeable weapon. I don't know what it is with Seder and chargeable weapons, because generally that doesn't really provide any solutions for anything. If a chargeable weapon is solidly based at a place, you're going to do anything to charge it, right? It doesn't really matter. If you're camping Solra before the Tumek and Shadow and you have a harmonized orb, you're gonna do Wintertodt, right? That's just player psychology. Now, if those chargeable weapons aren't either incredibly obviously bis or even kinda good at most places, you're obviously not gonna go through any effort to charge them, right? So what this essentially means is putting a charging mechanic on a weapon means that you're gonna use it any time it's bis, and you're never going to use it when it's not bis, essentially. And the Fang is barely bis at most places. Now, we can talk about the AT2 bosses, and I think their balancing was kinda bad. I think they should have had substantially lower defense, so the Fang wouldn't really have a niche there. Now, I think that's a really good argument. But other than the AT2 bosses, the places where Fang is bis are Tombs of a Mascot, Nex, and just random content that doesn't really matter for most people, like Group Bandos, Corp, and Abyssal Sire, right? Those are the places where Fang used to be solidly bis before DT2 came out. Now with DT2 again, things have changed, but I think that's a vector of boss design, not a vector of weapon design. And if your goal essentially with these charges would be, hey, you're gonna use the Fang only at Nex and TOA, and maybe at Corp if that's worth it. If you go through the calculations, you calculate how much time it takes to charge the Fang versus how many charges you use at like fucking Corp, and you go like, oh yeah, no, that's actually worth it for me over the spec method, so I'm just still gonna do Fang Suicide method, even though now there's runecrafting time added onto the calculations. That's fair enough, if that's your design goal. But your design goal isn't to only make sure that everyone uses Fang, but only in places where it's piss. Your design goal is to essentially gatekeep gear progression, so it'll just make more sense with like more classic MMO gear progression. But the problem with that is that OSRS has never had classic MMO gear progression. You can have really early game stats and gear, and you can still finish most content in the game. That's just because there aren't really objective gear checks the same way there are in like other MMOs. And that means that even though you can convince yourself that there's a gear check, practically speaking, you can have a dragon scimitar, dragon mace, dragon sword, I guess, and like a fucking amulet of power, complete rack gear, and you can do every single piece of content in the game. The thing that the Fang changed is essentially that now rack gear is way more appealing, right? So if you want to essentially skip like classic MMO gear check type progression, you can just go get a Fang. You can basically essentially rag every single boss in the game. Nothing changes, it's just easier to rag bosses. That's perfectly acceptable to me. I think the thing that's unacceptable is that new bosses are still getting designed with high defense, ignoring the fact that the Karasi and the Fang are in the game. I think now that those two weapons exist, that's fine when it comes to old content. I don't think that's fine when it comes to new content. I think new content should have substantially lower defense to make up for how powerful accuracy boosting options are right now. That's just my opinion. I think that's the best approach at this point in time. Obviously TOA drop rates should have been changed, whatever, who cares. That's done. It's far in the past, there's no getting around it now. And the overall premise behind like all of these arguments that I think is inherently flawed, I think is very prevalent throughout the high level community, and it's this false impression that new players are kinda just idiots, right? That new players essentially just have to go through a extended gauntlet of just random bullshit until they actually figure out how to play the game, and at that point they're already like sunk too deep, they've made too many mistakes, and they go like, okay, it doesn't really matter anymore. I'm gonna play the game the way I always played it because the way I always played it was fun, and so now they're basically stuck doing the same content they've been doing because they've been basically hazed into it. I think that's a really, really bad form of enjoying this game. I think the best form of enjoying this game is going into it with the assumption that you're going to like some content, you're not going to like any other piece of content. Because maybe like half the content in the game, you're not gonna like 100%. Practically speaking, even people like me who like 80% of the content in the game are relatively rare. But with the way that the community works and the way that the game is designed at a low level, it's essentially encouraging you to do as many different things as possible. You should get GM, you should max, you should do all of these different things just to have like a respectable account. I don't think that's true in any sense. I think that's just how you play the game when you pick it up for the first time and don't know what you like it. I think if all you want to do is train runecraft, you hit 200 mil runecraft and then you want to quit, that's a way better way of playing the game than going like, okay, I'm gonna go max and I'm gonna go get GMs because those are the best items in the game. Essentially, those are the most prestigious items. Because practically speaking, no item in this game is prestigious. Everything is very learnable and it's just a time sink. Any item that you're flexing on your account is essentially just a measure of how much time you've spent trying to get that item. I don't think this is a valuable way of approaching the game again. I don't think it's useful to just tie this sense of value to what's essentially an efficient hour sheet. I think the best way to play RuneScape is to just do the content you find fun, and it doesn't matter how many efficient hours you've put into the game in whatever metric that you're tracking. Just do the content you like, ignore the content you don't like. If you don't want to get Varrock medium armor because you just want to train mining and you're in the desert quarry for like a week without the Varrock armor because you CBA to do diaries, that's way better than going to do those diaries just because you want to be slightly more efficient. And that's what I did personally on my account. I ignored the Varrock armor benefits for a while. I just went to mine sandstone. I knew what I was doing was inefficient, of course, but I didn't care about it being efficient because I just didn't want to do the diary, so I didn't do the diary. I feel like this is a way better approach to the game. Because on a baseline level, you don't need every single tiny fucking perk that you can gather from all around the game. But once you have those tiny perks because you didn't know what else to do, you're just gonna keep chasing more of them, right? And I think we should have this attitude towards newer players, like, hey, you can just do every single piece of content in the game. You don't really need, like, high tier gear. You do need combat levels, obviously. You need to train your strength and your magic and your ranged. Also attack and defense, but that's less relevant for just getting through content, but whatever. Like, going to new players and saying, hey, you can choose what you want to do. You don't need to one small favor the entire game. I know that's how the game pushes you. I know that's where the game design inherently leads you to, but if you don't like content, you can just skip it. That would be a much better approach, and it's an approach that people just don't seem willing to take, because I think new players need to be hazed through this entire process, because that's what they did, and that's how they ended up with their very malformed playstyle of just wanting to do content they don't like for the sake of essentially having clout in an efficient number spreadsheet. Now again, this isn't against Seder personally. I don't even know if Seder thinks this way, but I do think it's kind of a really shitty perspective to have on the game and on new players. So this was kind of an incoherent ramble, but you know, it is how it is. As a quick addendum, if the way that you enjoy the game is by just ticking off boxes in an efficient hour spreadsheet, I completely understand. That's the way I enjoy playing the game too. I enjoy going through spreadsheets, calculating how many hours I gain, how many hours I lose, and so on and so on. It's one of my favorite parts. However, that's not the default playstyle that most people have. Most people don't by default go like, hey, I wanna fill out the TOTUS spreadsheet, right? I'm a TOTUS member. Obviously, I like doing random bullshit I don't like just to fill out numbers on a sheet. But I don't really have that much fun doing that. I just do it because I'm bored mostly. And it's a really, really, really fun way to pass the time if there are no other alternatives. Now, if you're not bored, and if you're playing the game because you actually want to do something really fun, the conversation is very different. And I don't think we should be assuming that people only play this game because they're bored. So I guess that's a better way to phrase that particular point. I'm just a bit heated right now because every time I see a YouTube video saying essentially like, hey, Forestry was the worst update of all time, I just get annoyed.